Welcome. I'm Lisa Pullman, the Executive Director of the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and I'm so glad you're here with us this afternoon. NRCM is a membership organization, and many of you in the audience are members, so thank you, because we couldn't do the work we do without you. Now, we all recognize that climate change poses significant risks to Maine and our nation. This afternoon's panel will provide a larger view, examining ways in which climate change is disrupting lives, lands, and communities around the world. NRCM is pleased to be co-sponsoring this panel with the American Security Project and the World Affairs Council of Maine. We also very much appreciate the time and effort that each of our panelists have made to be here today. We're looking forward to them sharing their perspectives and fostering a conversation about these important issues. So let me introduce Esther Babson, who serves as Climate Security Manager for the American Security Project. Esther has a master's in global security studies from Johns Hopkins University, with a focus on the impact of climate change on security in South Asia. You can find additional background in your program. Esther will moderate our panel and introduce the panelists. Again, thanks to everyone, including the panelists, for being here today. Esther.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Climate Change Disrupting Lives, Lands, and Communities Around the World. I'm Esther Babson from the American Security Project, and I'd like to thank Lisa and the Natural Resources Council of Maine and the World Affairs Council of Maine for co-sponsoring this event, and of course the University of Southern Maine for hosting us in this beautiful space. To give a short background on the American Security Project, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit national security research organization based in Washington, D.C., founded in 2005 by then-Senators John Kerry, Chuck Hagel, Warren Rudman, and Gary Hart. ASP tackles the long-term national security threats that face our country without partisanship. Today, our board of directors and consensus for American security include leading voices in national security, including experts in Russia relations, nuclear, energy security, American competitiveness, and of course, today's topic, climate security. We know that the climate is changing, both in the US and across the globe. Floods, droughts, and storms are becoming increasingly common and extreme. This has led to water and food insecurity in some of those countries. Forced migration and political instability are some potential consequences of that insecurity. Some recent immigrants to Maine have left their homelands because of such instability. Hearing their perspectives, along with the national security perspective, helps all of us better understand the long-term impacts of climate change as unfolding environmental and humanitarian crises, and why that matters for our own security. So, to kick things off, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. So first to my left, we have Lieutenant General John Kasla, who had a distinguished career with the Marines for over 35 years and is now part of numerous organizations, including ASP. Next to him, we have Charles Rugarinyange, a New Mainer from Burundi, who came to Maine in 2017 and is an environmental consultant. Next to him, we have Christophe Mbui, a New Mainer from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who came to Maine in 2017 as well, and has a background as a human rights attorney. And finally, we have Maxwell Chikota, a New Mainer from Katanga in Zambia, who came to Maine in 2002 and owns businesses in both Maine and Zambia. So, turn it over to General Kasla to give us a brief introduction into the climate security nexus. General Kasla?
Thank you, Esther. It's a pleasure to be back in Maine. When I was on active duty, I used to come into Naval Air Station Brunswick. I was an aviator, and I always liked to do the lobster runs that we made up here. And I was so impressed, I brought my wife back on this trip, and we've been enjoying the seafood and the environment here, so it's always good to be back in Maine. You know, as a military professional, I was trained to abhor instability, uncertainty, and chaos, and value stability, certainty, and order. But you know, today we face instability, uncertainty, and chaos, and that is a threat to our national security. 65 million people have been displaced by violence, by conflict, by persecution. This is the highest number since World War II. By 2030, between a half and 2/3 of the world's poorest will be living in fragile governments. The number of major conflicts around the world has tripled since 2010. Today, there are 32 major conflicts around the globe that impact our national security. While not the only reason for this instability, climate change has been what we call in the military a threat multiplier. It makes bad things worse. Climate change has been a factor in the Ethiopian civil war in the 70s and 80s, in Darfur in the early part of this century, in the Arab Spring uprising in 2011, and in the ongoing Syrian civil war. 80% of agriculture, and it's not going to get any better, 80% of agriculture in the developing countries does so without benefit of irrigation. The impact of climate change is most pronounced in the low latitude areas where most of the world's fragile population exists. 1.3 billion people live in at-risk, ecologically fragile lands. And it is estimated by the World Food Program that some 22.5 million people are displaced by climate-related extreme events every year. One of the areas that is affected is the Lake Chad Basin. When I was a young lieutenant colonel, I went to Chad in the early 90s as we prepared for a potential coup so that we could evacuate Americans if necessary. As a part of that visit, I traveled around the country, flew over Lake Chad, got to visit with the population and see how things were working in that particular country. Last year, in 2017, I went back. I flew over Lake Chad, and I saw that the lake is now 10% of what it was in 1960. And what is the impact? And why is the reasons? The reasons are a combination of increased use of the resources, some mismanagement, and the change in climate that's reduced the flow of the Shari River into the lake. What has been the results? You see the 150,000 fishermen that used to gain their livelihood from the lake out of a job. You see the herdsmen with cattle moving those herds south into the more crop-intensive areas of the country, all this creating conflict between those populations and communities, and creating that instability, that uncertainty of economic survival, and the chaos which has allowed organizations like Boko Haram to get a start, recruit, generate funding for their activities, have an impact on the governments, the stability of the governments, and keep moving in the direction of eventually impacting our strategic relations with those in that area, economic relations, diplomatic, our national security. We can get into this a little more during the questions and answer session, but right now I think you want to hear from those others that have had personal experiences to tell. Charles?
Thank you. I'm going to talk about climate change impact in Burundi. I will share you my experience. So this is I'm Charles. I'm an environmental consultant. I'm also now a student at Portal Adult Education. I'm volunteering at the Nature Conservancy freshwater program, African region. Back home, I was the executive director of ABN, which is a bedrock partner in Burundi, and I attended many international meetings about climate change, including IPCC, COP, and AMCEN, which is African Ministerial Environments. So, give you an overview of Burundi. Now, what is Burundi? Burundi is located in Africa. Give you it is a size of Massachusetts, and is bordered with 3 countries. In the north, we have Rwanda. In the west, we have Democratic Republic of Congo, which is DRC, and east and south we have Tanzania, and the population growth is 3%, and our economy is based on agriculture. We don't have industry; it's mostly 2 or 3 industries. So this is how Burundi is. You can see on your left the map of Burundi. Where is yellow is the hotspot. Where is for droughts? There is we have normally we have 2 months of dry season, but there we have about 6 or 4, and you can see how this will impact our economy since it is based on agriculture. And that is our flag, which can be distinguished. So there's a flood, how flood has impacted a new construction area. Of course, it is not only the floods, because there is also mixed out of the poor catchment management, but you can see how the impact can be you can have. This is we have more than 100 people has been killed, and on your right you can distinguish the ruin of the house, and most of them, as you see, they are the poorest. The poor people are affected, which also sometimes many developing countries are also exposed as developed country, but they are not. They don't have opportunity to face or to adapt to climate change. So now you see on your right, on your left, you can distinguish how crop production has been affected by a drought because there was a change on grow season. On your right, you can see how the climate change has also impacted ecosystem health. So now the potential impact on water resources. My country, like other countries in Africa, we depend on our energy is dependent on hydropower, and you can, when there is a dry season or when we don't have enough precipitation, you can see in your right there we don't have water, and so which means that our capital or fewer industries, they can't work without this source of energy. So now I want to talk about fishery, how fishery has been impacted by climate change. So I'm talking about Lake Tanganyika. First, I will give you a description, which is Lake Tanganyika. Lake Tanganyika is the second largest lake in Africa. It's after Victoria, which is located between Uganda and Kenya. We have some holes in Africa, you can see. And the world second deepest and second largest freshwater lake after Baikal, situated in Russia. And the Lake Tanganyika is of global importance and a source of life of million people, which is living in the basin, most of them for water supply and fishery. The lake also have 1,500 plants, and among them, 40% are endemic. So now, looking the picture on your right, you can see how sedimentation has affected the lake, which effect is coming from erosion upstream and affect the lake. So scientists have seen that the collapse of microalgae, fish, and mollusk population over the last century coincide with the recent rapid warming trends. And there are many impacts now. Can see some impact. There is spreading of malaria, spreading of crop disease, more invasive and alien species, change in species composition and disturbance of the food chain, change in the precipitation pattern causing harm to land and the water ecosystem. Thank you for your attention. Merci beaucoup, mon French speakers.
Yep, we'll be taking questions at the end, so hold your questions until we're finished with all the presentations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the floor. I'm going to speak on the impact of climate change in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in short, DRC. My name is Christophe Mbui. My background is environmental legal consultant. I'm a human rights activist researcher. I earned a Master's of Law degree from the University of South Africa, the country of Tata Madiba. Currently, I'm working on a Doctor of Laws PhD dissertation. So this is the overview of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The DRC is the same size as 1/4 of the US. It's a bridge country between East, West, and Southern Africa. The estimated population is 80 million people. And we have got a UN peacekeeping mission in DRC since 1999 due to the political unrest and armed conflict. The environmental context of the DRC, so much is to be said, but I would like just to give, again, an overview. More than 69% of tree cover and 90% of population live in the forest, which is the second largest forest in the world, after the Amazon. The DRC is the green heart of Africa, as you can see, and is one of the key countries in the struggle against the climate change. Despite the fact that the DRC has got the world's second largest river by volume and 86 lakes, enormous hydropower potential, but the DRC is experiencing actually the water shortage and change in growing season. We have also noticed the melting of ice on Ruwenzori Mountain, heavy rainy seasons and increased flooding, forced migration of Mbororo people from the south. As I will go, I'll be trying to explain that in these slides. Forced migration, humanitarian crisis, and insecurity in the DRC. As you can see, these are one of the pictures of Mbororo people crossing. Climate change is causing droughts and decreased water in Lake Chad, as the general mentioned. Mbororo people are nomadic and historically depended on Lake Chad for their survival. Mbororo people forced to move from neighboring countries to the DRC for water and green pastures. With the existing armed conflict and the absence of government in the eastern part of the DRC, particularly the northeast, refugees are streaming across borders, which fuel more instability and conflict. Here is the slides just to show where are Mbororo people coming. I'll try to explain. They are coming, they came from the Sahel up there. So they've settled on around the Lake Chad in years. As you see, the Lake Chad is growing dry. So they are coming. They've migrated first to the Central African Republic. But as you can also observe, the DRC is the green pastures. So here is like a transition. Some went to the Sudan. As you can see, the South Sudan is trying to keep some green pastures, so they've migrated to the northeast of the Democratic Republic of Congo, what we call Oriental Province. And their forced migration is causing what we call the inadequate legal protection. As a lot of people know, the security and humanitarian situation have worsened. The 1951 Refugee Convention does not mention the environmental refugee, like climate refugee. They only mention the refugee for political reasons, like race, running from their country to another one. But refugees, climate are not yet mentioned. But the Kampala Convention is the first convention to mention internally displaced people due to climate change. Remember, here is in the confine of the borders. It's not people crossing the country to another one. So we can end up by concluding that there is what we call the absence of legal protection for climate refugees fleeing across national borders. So there is a gap in international law when it comes to climate refugee. The word is being mentioned only in the Kampala Convention. So in my conclusion, I can say climate change is instigating migration to a region already in conflict, which fuels greater instability. Need for international climate change action. In political science, we always say to govern is to foresee. Prevention is better than cure. So I think this is the moment whereby people can gather together, think of the solution. So I would like to, I put this picture because, as you can see, this woman is playing music. Music has been escape in my country despite bad circumstances. So people can sing, can keep moving, people can laugh, people can dance. And just to honor women, despite everything that women have been experiencing in this region, particularly in my country. Thank you, merci beaucoup. Twasakijila wabuni. This is my mother tongue.
And thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I'm going to speak about climate change based on my personal experience. My name is Maxwell Chikuta. A lot of people call me Chikira, so just call me Max. I was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the Katanga region, and I also spent some time in the country called Zambia. So I came here in 2002. I'm also a proud former Portland Adult Education student and the University of Southern Maine. My bachelor's degree and master's degree all are from here, so I'm proud to be here. As I said, I want to show you where Katanga is. Let me see if I can see them right here. This is my country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Right there, that's where I come from. There's a town called Kolwezi, and this is Zambia. So I'm going to speak my personal experience from Katanga and Zambia. So to the left, you see that picture there. It's the story. That's not me on the picture. Let me just be clear. The story about that picture is that when I was a child, I used to swim in that river and fish in that river. And we have abundant fishing industry, and that is a catfish. So it was an economic driver for our village. But now, when I went back in 2015, the story is not the same. So I'll tell you the story. My primary school was called Nkando. Does not exist anymore. Why? Because the water has gone so dry that you can't get the catfish of that side anymore. So that is forcing the villagers to migrate and go to find places in town where they can do labor works to feed their families. So the teachers were supported by the fishing industry, were not paid. And guess what? My primary school no longer exists. So when I went back in 2015, my tears dropped out of me because where I used to swim, right now it's almost like 3 and counting miles from the river. It's all land now. People are just passing by this road and stuff like that. But that is the place where I used to swim, I used to fish. The village is shrinking in size because there's no more, you can't support your family. So this picture here to the right, I talked to Amy, and I called my family down there. There's a cousin of mine. I said, can you take the picture? Actually, it's a recent picture. Just to show when the water dry, villagers follow the water and cultivate. As you can see, that is corn. So because of the water has gone, and there's no much activities in my village. So what that has done to my village is that you have now to support your family because they can't generate any money. Families now, they have to sponsor their kids to go and study in town because there's no more primary school. So that is the small story from my village, and this is personal experience. So when we go to Zambia, in Zambia, as you can see there, drought has made a lot of economic effect upon the population. That is a Kafue Gorge Dam. So you can see how the water, right here, it used to be water. So the dam has gone down, and the production of energy really has created tremendous economic effect upon the population. That is another dam, which is called Kariba Dam. As you can see also the water. There was a deficit of about 1,000 megawatts, largely due to the drought and intermittent technology. Lastly, I have this, which I drew out from the study by, let me just go and give credit to the person who made this study. I have it here. So the study was made by Mpanga, so I have to acknowledge that it's not my study. So you see the Kafue Gorge Dam, I just showed you the picture previously. When it was installed, it was supposed to produce 990 kilowatt. The Kariba Bank, so the total for the entire country was supposed to produce 2,354 megawatts. But in 2015, only 1,099 megawatt was produced. And in 2016, only 950, not even half of what it was meant for. So what happened when I was in Zambia last year, they are dividing part of the city, which part can have electricity for 4 hours. Then they will shut power to that area and open power to another area. So it's creating economic chaos. So thank you very much for coming. Climate change is real. And this is my personal story, and I attest that I saw it when I was a child and when I grew up. So thank you so much for what you are doing. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you to all of our panelists for these wonderful presentations. So we'll move into the Q&A now, and I'd like to ask a first opening questions, and then we'll open up to the audience. So we'll start out with a question for all of the panelists to discuss. You've each discussed some of the major climate impacts for your countries. Going into the future, what are the threats that you're worried about the most? What are the top concerns that you see coming down? Start with you, General Kosloff, if you like.
I see the most immediate concerns, the climate change generated, or at least assisted and generated migrations. Talked a little bit about what's happening in the Lake Chad Basin, other migrations are occurring, of course, in the Middle East and Syria. We're seeing situations in South Sudan aggravated by climate change. There are 4 nations right now that are near famine conditions. All 4 of them require immediate attention. And again, the situation is aggravated by drought and other extreme weather events that are occurring right now. So those are the most immediate.
You can just go down the line. Yep.
Yes, as the Mosemoy, I see now I'm afraid of food insecurity in many countries and developing countries, because the economy is based on agriculture, and we don't have enough technology for irrigation, which means that without rain, no production. No production means that we'll be affected our health, and also maybe there will be also a migration because of climate change. The second I can see is the extinction of some species, which should also affect the food chain. I have involved in research showing that bears are trying to move gradually as becoming very, the temperature is increasing. The bears are trying to migrate hot in altitude, but some of them also shift the ecosystem, which means that sometimes the condition become harder to survive, and they extinguish on the species. Again, we have seen that again in my country, we have seen ecological condition has changed, and malaria has spread over the countries. Now we are recorded about where the total population is 10 million, and now 2 million are now affected by malaria. I can see that.
Thanks. Christophe?
Yeah, okay. I can say I can mention the food shortage, like a problem attacking straight people for their survival. You see, if you read the last report of the Human Rights Watch on the DRC, the one that came out recently, they've mentioned something like famine is expected to affect around 80 million of the population in the Democratic Republic of Congo. 10 years ago, one of the journal in DRC called Congo Afrique, it's run by the Roman Catholic Church. They've quoted from the Belgian journal, which said, for example, they've stated that the DRC, well managed, has got the ability to feed around 2 billion people. You see the contrast. So I'm afraid of many crises coming together. You know, the economical crisis can generate the political one. And from the political one, we can go to the social one. This is what I'm seeing. And all this combined to the poor governance, I think, you know, I'm just seeing the link like a system from one crisis to another. It's difficult to say only one aspect will be affected. It's like a human being, a human body. Once one part of your body is affected, all the body can be affected. So I can see multiple crises coming together, caused by the climate change and affecting every area of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you.
Maxwell?
Yeah, as for me, it's the drought, and my biggest concern is deforestation in Africa due to poor technology. And if we lack policy regulation for everyone to follow in the world, we are not going to achieve what we are calling climate change. Because the regulation, I would say that here in America, we are following regulations, what to do, what not to do. But when you go to Africa, other countries such as China, they coming and dump everything they have in Africa, and no one would say anything. So we're not going to see change soon, as long as other countries are not obeying the policy and regulations. So what happened, deforestation, as I mentioned, lack of hydropower, villagers are going now in the forest to cut the trees and make what we call charcoal, because they have to cook. They have to use charcoal, they have to use trees, and when they're cutting those trees, they are not replacing them. So what will happen 50 years from now? Deforestation is real in Africa because we can't prevent, because we can't provide with technology to help villagers to make basic food, because they have to cook. As long as other countries are not following policies and regulation, I'm not sure that we are going to reach climate change protection.
Thank you. So my next question is for Christophe, Charles, and Maxwell. Can you describe the awareness of or attitudes about climate change in your countries, whether people recognize that as a threat? We could start with you, Christophe, if you'd like, or we can do Maxwell.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a wonderful question. Awareness comes with education in the community. And as I said, when you don't have a community organization, grassroots organization to go and teach each and everyone about climate change, there's no knowledge there. So there are also some organizations making efforts to achieve that. But grassroots level implementation, we are not talking about having offices in town, because downtown they have small technology, but when you go to the village, the poorest of the poorest are not educated. So what are we going to do? We are going to follow steps, maybe creating more grassroots level, send educators to every community in the villages if we can, to make people aware of the climate change. They can see it, but how to prevent it? The prevention is really difficult unless they have help. And help comes with education. And education can be achieved by people who have been inspired to go and inspire others to be just like them. Only then people can be aware.
Thanks. Charles, if you'd like to add anything?
Yes. In my country, I can say before it was very hard because the politician was not involved. They could say this is for developed countries. But now we came up for some policy in a secondary school and the university for training with there is some sector for climate change. And we also have what we call poverty reduction, in French, CSRP. This is a policy guiding five years. We have to build another. We have also included climate change. Now, each sector must include climate change. Health, agriculture, they must include climate change in the when they are implementing the program. They have to include climate change. Now we can see now we think that now all population are now know the impact based on that how food security has been impacted, and how the students are also we have included in the program of teaching.
Christophe, do you have anything to add as well?
Yes. Yeah, awareness, information, is education is mentioned in many international instruments like the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity. But the problem is the rate of literacy is very low in my country. People are not really educated. So how are you going to make understand let's say people are not educated, because climate change use very sophisticated words like greenhouse gases. These people going to understand what does the word greenhouse gases stand for? This is a question. Another question is they were not there when all these mechanisms were designed. Some were there by some people. So you just can try to make them understand they don't have the ability to cope with all this. I think one of the strategies is to bring it down, to make it understandable to the level of the people in the community, and using images and languages that they can easily assimilate.
Great.
Then it can be...
Sorry, go on.
Okay. Thank you.
No, if you have anything else to add, it's fine.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
So to turn to you, General Costello, with the change in administration, do you see the military still taking action on climate change, and what are they doing to prepare?
You know, in the military, what you're taught is to dispassionately consider all threats and act to either mitigate or somehow or another accommodate and overcome that particular threat. It is stupid not to consider all threats and act accordingly. Well, thank you. So in the military, we go through a process. It's called intelligence preparation of the battlefield, IPB. And what it does is you take into consideration the battle space, the terrain, the weather, other factors, including enemy threat. And you would also take into consideration environmental factors that might impact your operations, extreme weather conditions, rain, cold, wet, whatever. So the approach is not political and it's not cultural. It's our version of a scientific approach where you try to make sure that you consider all of the elements that are involved in it and come out with a plan that accomplishes the mission and saves lives.
Thank you. So going back to the rest of the group, so I know we've talked about some of the potential threats and also for some of you the challenge of education. But what are some ways, if you've seen any, where the country is adapting to climate change, or do you have any recommendations for what we should be doing locally, regionally, or globally? So we can start at the end again, if you'd like, Maxwell, and then move our way this way.
Thank you very much. I'll give an example of what is happening in Zambia right now. I have a sawmill in Zambia, so we buy pine trees from the forest department. You can buy land and cut trees. But one of the requirements for you to even sign the contract with them is for you to pay the price to replace the tree you are cutting. So you cut 20 trees, you are going to pay money. They are going to buy 20 trees and pay workers to go and replace. So I think that was a good strategy so that they start replacing. You cut a tree and replace it. They are not asking you to do it, but you are going to pay and make sure that they replace it. So 20 years, 25 years, you have other trees being replaced. So another one is to find ways to help poor people in these countries. Because really, if there's no hydropower generated because of water, guess what? They'll continue to cut trees so that they can cook. So what technology can we implement to the lowest level that we can help villagers to cook without cutting trees? I think that should help a lot.
Okay. Thank you, moderator. Yeah, I would like to mention, for example, at the regional level, the implementation of rules. You see, Maxwell have mentioned the hydroelectricity power. Few years ago, they were supposed to build at all the capacity the Inga tree. Inga is the electricity, the hydropower electricity in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Well managed, it's able to produce 100,000 megabytes. So it means it can provide electricity to all Africa and even out of Africa. That can reduce the use of charcoal and firewood. But up to now, as I'm talking, the biggest problem we are having in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in Africa basically is the implementation. Rules are there, written on paper, the application. But globally, I can say unless there is a strong and vibrant social movement of civil society to challenge the power, then we can reach the action. Because right is not something that you must beg for it to be applied. It's your right. You must push in order to get it. Thank you.
Thank you. My country has started a certain number of measures to adapt. There are 3 plantations each year, 2 million, and there are also now to reduce because the problem is, as they say, my colleague, is we are using firewood and the charcoal, which brings more deforestation. We don't have energy, we don't have gases for cooking. We just use that. And so now we are now giving the population improving firewood, just the stove for cooking, so they can reduce the amount of charcoal or firewood. That is some of activity they are doing. But now, regionally, I think that we could have more collaboration for finding the solution. Because one of the solutions is to climate change, as they said, it's not one country, it's more than, it's global. We have to think about globally, not, and as our region is the most of them, we have the same problem. We have to find the solution, as I said, to build the dam with the water, transboundary waters. We have to conserve ecosystem and the forest, which can reduce some gases. So this is what I think regionally. But we need support from globally. We need support. We need alternative for charcoal. And this is what I say, these are some of countries, including the US, has signed it in Paris. They have said that they will support developing countries to implement and to reduce deforestation. We need solar energy. We don't know, we have enough, we don't have technology for solar energy. We have wind, but we don't have technology. So now, globally, I can call all countries to respect Paris agreements, including US. I understand that some don't need to stay in agreements. Staying in agreements, Paris agreement is a benefit for everyone. US will benefit and other one will benefit. Climate change is not a matter of business. It's a matter of death and life. Thank you.
Let me take a little different approach. There is, of course, the requirement to continue to reduce greenhouse gases, but in the meantime, it's also necessary to deal with resilience. And let me just talk briefly about an example that's going on here in this area, and that's the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. If you look at what the projections are for the shipyard, is by 2050 you're going to grow from about less than a dozen extreme tide events on the complex there to potentially 180. By the end of the century, sea level rise could potentially result in events which would bisect the complex. And what we need to think about is the fact that it is only one of 4 naval shipyards in existence now. Its mission is to refurbish and modify nuclear submarines. It's an essential element of our national security infrastructure, and we need to make sure that it continues to be an operating facility. I applaud them for one step that's been taken. They've put a microgrid in effect there where that they're less susceptible to power and other infrastructure failures as a result of water intrusion. But there's more that needs to be done, and it's more that needs to be done all across our military facility infrastructure where we need, while we make progress in the other areas in reducing the causes of climate change, that we need to build resilience into those facilities that exist now.
Great, thank you. So now we'll turn it over to the audience. We have a roving microphone, so please raise your hand if you have a question and wait for the microphone. And as always, please frame your question as a question so we can get to as many people as possible. Thanks.
I'm a regular protester at Bath Iron Works, protesting the building of destroyers. I want to say that there's no country that has a worse impact climate-wise as the United States. We have over 700 military bases all over the world. Most of them are Superfund sites, including the new one, a Navy base at Jeju Island built on the Heritage World Center.
Thank you. So
we
do you have
are
a
at
question?
war, and in the Middle East, we've destroyed the Middle East. We've been there for 17 years, and we continue to destroy the Middle East. Our country is committing war crimes in Yemen. We have a bloody history of impacting the climate. And these poor countries have to deal with the impact that the United States has caused.
Do you have a question?
How do you respond to that?
You know, I spent 36 years in defense of our country, ma'am, and I'm glad you're here today to talk. Hey, I didn't interrupt you, did I? 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 Okay, thank you, ma'am. So so that you can come here today and do that, and you can have your opinion. You know, I am proud of what I did. I'm proud of where I've served, and I'm proud of what I'm continuing to do in what I think is a service of this country. So thank you very much for being here.
I was intrigued by the fact, General, that you mentioned the establishment of a microgrid in the Kittery base. And my question is to ask the representatives of our African countries, which are blessed with lots of sunshine, the extent to which you think solar energy can help in your countries to adapt to the loss of electricity from some of the hydro facilities.
Thank you very much for that question. Go ahead, and if one of us have an answer, can go. But yeah, it's a good suggestion. Not only solar, we have also wind, massive wind. We can have wind technology and solar energies. But the bottom line is that we are so poor that we have to buy the technology from the countries who are governing the world. We don't have the capacity to buy solar equipment or wind equipment for each and every one in our villages. Only then. We have, like Bill Gates, he can dump millions of dollars on malaria prevention. We have other people doing the same thing, but forgetting the climate change. So if we have people who can also dump millions of dollars on climate change, we can have little solar panel in every village, and I think we'll be on the road to solve this problem we're talking today. Thank you for your question.
Okay, if I would like just to complete what he has said, maybe, you know, here is the dam. This is just Inga 3, is the name of the dam. Inga 3, according to the expertise, can supply to the electricity to all Africa. This is the clean energy, all Africa. There is Inga 1 and Inga 2 in my country, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which are not used at the maximum. Inga 4 never been exploited, so it hasn't been finished, the constructions. So I think the solar energy is very important, but we have got also resources in which we can just organize, put some investments in order to exterminate, not to reduce, to finish the use of charcoal and firewood, not only in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but in all Africa. Potentiality are there to supply the electricity to all Africa. But as I was saying, it's a matter maybe of a vision or maybe poor governance. So I think it's very important to also use, because the hydroelectricity is a clean energy. Thank you.
Okay, yep, we can go to the next question.
Hi, thank you. Just to kind of piggyback on the solar power idea, one of the groups that I give to as many times as I can, and I don't have a huge budget, I'm mostly retired, is a group called Solar Sisters, and they encourage the use of small solar lights throughout various African countries, rural areas, so women entrepreneurs, which I'm a big advocate of, can keep their businesses open a little longer because they have light. The kids can study a little longer because they have light. And they're trying to get rid of the kerosene lamps inside the houses because that's very toxic, of course. And I'm wondering if, small projects like that, because these other things are such huge undertaking, do you see a role for small groups like that would maybe have, as you said, like the solar panels just for the village, and maybe they could then have hot plates or some other way to cook? Solar Sisters is strictly little lights at this point, but it has a role for expansion. Do you know of any other groups like that? Do you see this as being valuable as another, I'm not saying the way to handle everything, but just another way to maybe help out more immediately? Thank you.
Anyone like to add to that?
Thank you very much. And I think that was a suggestion or a question. I'll assume that you are suggesting that Solar Sisters are the company, which I didn't know. And I'll research that more. And I agree with you. You can always start small. If we are able to supply mosquito nets to every villagers, maybe this organization, with support of other organizations, we can reach at the point whereby we can supply at least a solar panel to every village. So starting small is good, and the idea is good. I never heard about this organization, and I appreciate for your suggestion. Thank you very much.
Yep. Down here, I think you.
Two quick questions, one for the general and one for Christophe. Christophe, have you identified any next steps, the next fuel that you can see your people going to after charcoal? I mean, what's the progression? That's one question. And for the general, is the Pentagon working on any of this stuff? I mean, they've got all the brain power in the world. Are they working on, batteries or systems that are going to rescue the planet? Okay, so those are the things. All right.
Christophe, go ahead. Thank you. Speak about the child.
Thank you. I would like to go to one of the speech. After the use of the charcoal, I think it will be the deforestation, because they cut tree in order to do charcoal and firewood. So you see this region, the north is there is already drought, but this is like the transition. But if here in this country, or these countries, people start to continue using the firewood and the charcoal. So it's even one of the key elements of deforestation in my country. And what's next? I think what's next will be just crisis, war, and instability. As you can see, look at around here. Out of 9 countries that are sharing the border with the DRC, almost 5, if not 6, are having the drought inside those countries. You can see inside the map. You see? And for example, we all say water is life. It will be a matter of survival. So what do you think that people are going to do? They are going to fight. They are going to cross the border. And, you know, in Africa, land is conceived like a place of prayer. Land is like a shop, a pharmacy, everything. So people will be killing each other. I think this is the good moment to try to think, to plan the future that we want for the generation to come, instead of being surprised by multiple crises coming together. Thank you.
In the Iraq war and Afghanistan, I was in western Iraq, standing on Aditha Dam, watching a convoy of Marines come in, and saw one of the biggest explosions I've ever seen. IED went off. 7 out of 10 of those convoys are carrying gas and water to locations. And it became an imperative, because that became a real vulnerability for us, to develop alternate fuels and alternate energy sources. Many reasons. We increased the battery needs in an infantry battalion by over 300%, more radios and many other electronics and so forth. So the lady back there was talking about the solar panels. We got right now backpack solar panels that they can install in locations and recharge the batteries. They're working with various fuel cells. We even have small wind turbines that generate power. And all of that, and in vehicles for the first time, in planes and all, we're looking at how much fuel it consumes. And that becomes a part of the decision process on whether or not we purchase those pieces of equipment. So that's the operational in the field side. In garrison, if you go to Army installations in particular right now, they are making efforts to go to net zero energy use. In other words, generate as much energy aboard base as they use, and it's a combination of everything from thermal to wind power to solar, and so it's a real effort. The DoD is the largest single consumer of fuel in the United States. So, you know, a lot smarter guys and gals than me are actively working on how can we reduce the amount of fossil fuel that we run through our equipment. How can we reduce that footprint? And it's all about doing the smart thing, doing it that makes sense, that reduces the risk to America's greatest treasure, which is the blood of the men and women who serve. So thanks for that question.
Oh, okay.
Hello. One factor that hasn't been discussed recently and should be is the factor of population in this whole scene of climate change.
Sorry, so the question just about population growth?
Could you speak to that factor of population growth in the problem of climate change?
I can take a hit at that first. A real concern is the so-called population bulge, youth population bulge in Africa. Right now, the 15 to 24-year-olds constitute 60% of the unemployed in Africa. There are 200 million youths in Africa. That's going to double to 400 million by 2050. So yes, the population explosion is of great concerns, and where it really, the nexus comes in is food insecurity. How do we provide enough food to feed those folks? How do we create the jobs necessary for them to have economic viability? And why does the military concern? Because lack of jobs, poor economic overcrowding, competition for resources, all of those elements create instability, uncertainty, and chaos, and provide incubators for growing insurgencies and people who are prone because they're trying to feed their families to violence.
Anyone else like to add to that?
Yeah, I can add something. I think population is, one hand, it is a problem, but it is also a potential, I think. Example, an example of my country. We have the same size of Belgium. We have the same population of Belgium. Belgium doesn't have a problem. But we have a problem because our economy is based on agriculture. Give you an example, our human density is over 400 per square kilometers. About, I think it is mile, it is about, I don't have to change in mile, but yeah. But the problem is now, if we should have technology to have industries, this population should be used in industry. So there will be, the problem will be solved. So that, this again, of course, actually, if we consider it is a problem, because again, my country, we have 0.5 hectares per household, which means that it's not enough to produce for household. And I have shown you that our family, the fecundity per woman is 7, plus 2, the man, the woman, is 9 per household, which means they need to be fed on half hectare. They are starting there, we don't have food for people. And the climate change is additional threats as mentioned. So actually, we don't have, I can't say we have a solution, and solution tomorrow, after tomorrow, but as you know, the population, you need at least 25 years. 25 years or even more. So the problem will stay there, but if we have, again, technology, we should have a solution.
If you can allow me also to add about the population there, population density also play a big role in climate change, especially in Africa, whereby there is no development or building of new houses for the overpopulation. So people live in crowded area, and that create also health issues. So I'll give you an example of the city of Zambia. The capital city is Lusaka. If you go on the internet, you just Google Lusaka, Zambia, you find that the city, the entire country was shut down in January because of cholera, which was caused by overcrowded, overpopulation, and there was problem with the sanitation. So you are right, overpopulation and the population density, especially in Africa, with poor drainage system, sanitation create big health issues. So cholera was in Zambia in January, and it was real. So thank you so much for adding that question.
Next question?
Oh, okay. Thanks. I'm worried about something that basically you all talked about, which of course is water. But I wonder if you would address, I'm a little concerned about Nestle buying up all the water, all the aquifers. The second largest in the world is in Brazil, and they are partnering with another company right now to purchase that. Here in Maine, they just purchased the water under Freiburg, Maine. And in Michigan, the government just voted to allow Nestle to buy up a huge aquifer there. This is just the beginning, and I wonder, perhaps the general could, maybe you could assuage my fears. That would be great.
Yeah, I wish I could assuage my fears. Again, I'm a farmer. One of the reasons I'm involved in this is I think you need to be a good steward of the land and of the environment. And of course, the essential element is water. And I come from an area too where irrigation pivots have sprouted like wildfire flowers. And the aquifers that nobody paid any attention to over all these years, you know, what you're finding out now is that you have to dig, 50 feet deeper to get to the water layer and so forth on this. This is a critical issue. In South Africa, you already have cities running out of water there. Memphis and Mississippi is fighting over the aquifer that runs under on the borders between Tennessee and Mississippi. 30 years ago, North Carolina and Virginia were fighting over water. One of the areas of conflict that I visited several times is the Jordan River, which is between Israel and some of the neighboring countries. One of the ways that we are fighting it in the two areas that I'm concerned with, and we have to reduce our usage, is recycling water. And we are working with equipment inside the military that does that, so you can reuse the water and not continually increase the amount. And the other way in my other life, which is as a farmer, is the different ways of doing irrigation, drip irrigation, more precise application of water, reduction in that water. And also the overall precision agriculture, where it's the Goldilocks principle of just the right amount of the right stuff at the right place at the right time. There is an overwhelming requirement. It's essential that we reduce the amount of stuff that we use. And so there's a lot of heat and steam being generated on doing that, and water leads is the number one thing that we've got to conserve.
Thanks. So I think we have time for about one more question. Oh, looks like it's in the back.
Yes, this is primarily a question for the general. I just finished up a 5-year contract with the U.S. Army. During that time, I had the opportunity of... yes, sir. Deploying to the Middle East in the fight against the Islamic State. And one reoccurring theme that we were seeing was their success in recruiting in areas that were economically disparaged. And as desertification is slowly creeping across those specific areas, I'm just curious, what exactly is your opinion your foresight into the success of radical organizations in the recruitment operations, specifically in these areas affected by climate change in the near future.
Well, again, I talk about Lake Chad. What you're seeing there is as the climate reduces the size of Lake Chad, as you have fishermen losing their livelihood, as you have the conflict between the farmers and the herdsmen, as you have a breakdown in governance, then you have desperation. I've seen, and I know you have too, you've seen people, clawing in order to find enough stuff to feed their family. And when there is a lack of hope, when there's desperation, they look for alternatives. And one of those alternatives is finding folks that may have some funding, whether they've stolen it or whatever, that they can give those recruits to feed their family, and they become successful. And that's what we have got to eliminate, is we've got to strengthen the economy. It's not about shooting everybody. It's about using the other legs of our power, diplomacy and development, to strengthen the community, the economic well-being, and to put confidence in the government in order to eliminate the opportunities for those recruiting. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to the panelists for a wonderful event.